Hello, Mr. Wölken, you're just muted. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Muted. That's the this was just the test. No, okay, sorry. I'm very happy that more than 250 people registered for this event. So I hope that everyone has enough coffee for this very interesting morning debate. And I'll start right with my opening remarks. Dear colleagues, dear speakers, dear participants, I welcome you for a very, very timely debate we are having today about adaptation to climate change in the water sector. Timely, as we are in full process of negotiating the first European climate law, and timely also as the EU adaptation strategy is being overhauled. Adaptation to climate change sounds a bit euphemistic. Actually, we are in the midst of a beginning climate crisis, and for some, there won't be any means for adaptation. This is why, in international negotiations, we are also talking about loss and damages. Peoples, plants, animals on an island that is sinking, or a species that just can't live in a 1 degree warmer world or in a drying region, they cannot adapt. And for many people, the only mode of adaptation is fleeing their country, leaving their homes behind. So we should not forget about this. But we do have technologies and strategies at hand to adapt to the degree that is possible. And we will need to develop many more in many more places. We will need to overhaul our way of planning cities or agriculture and our water management in very profound terms. The warmer the air gets, the more water it can hold. So 7% more with every degree Celsius. This is even an exponential correlation. And since the pandemic, we know how bad this is. If you know this law of physics, you get an idea about the challenges we face. More water in hotter air means, for example, heavier rainfalls. A warming climate doesn't mean that we have overall less water on the planet. This is a circle, of course, but that we might not have the water in the place we used to have it and not at the times we need it. So much about science, and I'm happy that we will hear about that later even more. But as a member of the European Parliament, of course, we have to say that something about, I have to say something about the policies we need to tackle to these issues. First, I want to stress that talking about adaptation, of course, doesn't mean abandoning mitigation of global heating. We can only adapt to a certain degree before things are getting out of our hands. So we, of course, need to do both. Or, as an NGO in Germany would put it, we need to adapt to the unpreventable and prevent the unadaptable. Second, as every crisis, the climate crisis is profoundly unjust. People with lower income can very much less buy a cooling system or choose their job to work outdoors or even mitigate. I am therefore glad that the European Parliament has adopted some text I proposed for the climate law. The adaptation strategies, which are anchored in Article 4 of the climate law, shall focus in particular on the most vulnerable and impacted populations and economic sectors, identify shortcomings in this regard in consultation with civil society, and implement remedies. So much from the general line I want to draw, and just a little bit more on the nitty-gritty. I think in general we have to better combine urban planning and water services. If you think about pictures that are by now very common of European streets that are flooded like rivers, you can practically see that our water system sometimes can't take the quantities of water anymore. We have to plan more open spaces, not sealed with concrete or asphalt, more green spaces and plants that can take up the water. But as I said, sometimes we will have too much water and often not enough, or just not in the right place. The big droughts in the European Union in 2018 and 2019 are still very present. We urgently need to find solutions because these situations will come back. We have taken a good and a right step with the water reuse regulation. We also need to think about how to use water in a more frugal way. And this, in this one rare sector, it's allowed and a good thing to be frugal. Looking at the European multi-annual financial framework, we have the aim of preventing water use conflicts where possible, especially but not only with water reuse regulation. But I want to be crystal clear on one thing. When we do have a scarcity of water, drinking water always has to be the priority. Drinking water is a human right. No drilling for soft drink production, no agriculture, no golf courses. If in any region we run the risk of drinking water shortages, this has to be the priority. So much from my side as warming up. I'll give over now to the speakers to begin with, of course, the European Commission that will hopefully update us on their plans. And I'm very happy to have with us today Livio Sturbat. Mr. Sturbat holds the position of Deputy Head of Unit for Adaptation in the European Commission's Directorate General for Climate Action. And previously, he was Deputy Head of Unit for Better Regulation in the DG for Research and Innovation, where his team was responsible for the interim evaluation of the current EU program for research and innovation and for the impact assessment of the program Horizon Europe. I'm very happy that you are with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, and good morning to everybody. It's a real honor to have the opportunity to speak at this targeted and extremely timely, as we just heard, event on the role of water in the new EU strategy on climate adaptation. And my sincere thanks to the honorable member of the European Parliament for hosting us today. I'm here to give a brief overview of the European of the work on the strategy, and also to listen to your valuable feedback. It's timely, as the honourable MEP just mentioned, for a variety of reasons. And in particular, I am perhaps most appreciating this opportunity now, because in my role as a Deputy Head of Adaptation, I'm coordinating work on this new strategy. We're just now in an internal design process after casting a very wide net with the open public consultation and public consultations. You will hear about that in a second. But now in this internal design process, we're really on the drawing board. We're really tapping into work with other departments, and important stakeholders have an opportunity to make these inputs really go to the heart right now. So I'll start perhaps by stepping a bit back, and many of us can recall stories of many farmers in the Netherlands or in Germany who were surprised by the increased levels of nitrogen from manure in the underground water, and these have been recently sort of capturing the media attention. And similarly, we've seen pictures of the decimated forests in Central Europe, in Czechia and in Slovakia. In Czechia, it made the headlines even past the COVID pandemic, which was really on the front. Still, the unprecedented, or not so precedented drought in Czechia, the worst in 500 years, really captured the public attention. The problem for the Dutch farmers and the German farmers, the Czech foresters, is not with legislation. The problem of foresters and related industries necessarily the bark beetle. There is a common enemy behind all of this, and that is climate change. Adaptation to climate change, we've heard also from the honourable member of the European Parliament that it's linked to many more things than just adaptation. It's not just a euphemism, and increasingly in the on our continent, it's becoming a reality. It's moved also in the attention of policymakers. and also the wide public from a problem in distant lands, in exotic islands that are being submerged, but has come home. We're seeing these on our daily news. We're seeing this in our Twitter feeds. We're seeing it outside in our gardens. We've also experienced in Brussels, where a lot of us are based, a horrible drought this summer as well. And that is why it's really important to look at vulnerabilities, just as we heard in the introduction, and also to identify shortcomings. The problem with this increased visibility of adaptation in Europe brings mixed feelings with it. On the one hand, it's very good because this increased awareness helps with the preparations, helps minimize the cost of non-action. It's easier to take action when the public is aware of the nature of the problem. On the other hand, it's a bad news because it's a sign of our collective failure to stop climate change early enough in the first place. And we heard about this also, the interplay between mitigation of climate change and adapting to it. And the best adaptation is mitigation in the first place so that we stop the problem from happening. We have a huge challenge ahead of us to bring down our emissions and simultaneously to make our society more resilient. And we have to do so in sync with a lot of other major challenges, such as restoring our nature, ensuring a healthy environment, and switching to sustainability. And this is why the Commission made the European Green Deal the roadmap for making the EU economy sustainable. I would highlight just a few of the flagships of the Green Deal. Please note that from the adaptation perspective, we work in harmony and in concert almost all of these initiatives. I'll start with climate neutrality by 2050. This is in the climate law, and we've just heard of the excellent work that the Parliament is doing on this, on the draft of the Commission, which incidentally came out just before the first lockdown on the 4th of March. Inside the Green Deal, there is also the European Climate Pact, which focuses on citizens, on business and civil society, empowerment of individual and collective action, and of course the new EU adaptation strategy. But there's a host, as I said, of other initiatives like the new forest strategy, which is being designed concurrently with the adaptation strategy because of the huge overlap between the role that forests play as sinks of carbon, but also the needs that forests have to be adapted and to be helped so that they can in turn help us. But it's also linked to the renovation wave, which just came out, where a lot of resilience to climate change will be put in our buildings stock, but also the review of trade policy because of the knock-on effects in global value chains from climate impacts elsewhere. The recovery from the current pandemic has made all these efforts a lot more important, and resilience has really become a guiding light in order to build back better. We in the Commission policy documents used to talk about resilience as a shorthand for climate resilience, but now resilience has taken a front seat more broadly, and we now have to say resilience to a lot of things, including to climate. Some of the lessons that we've learned over the last years in regard to adaptation at the EU level, on which we are building on for the new strategy. First, the strategy that the EU has from 2013 has really helped. At the time that the strategy was adopted, 13 member states did not have any sort of policy on adaptation. And since then, in no small part thanks to the efforts at EU level, this has been done. And now all the member states have an adaptation strategy or an adaptation plan. And this is really good news. This is also trickling down at the regional and local level. And this is an important development, this full governance integration, because climate change adaptation is really about local specificities. The impacts are very diverse and they happen on the ground in the communities themselves. We've also set up Climate Adapt, the first stop shop for climate adaptation information in Europe, and this has been a real success, drawing knowledge, drawing expertise. And we've also supported a lot of development of knowledge and innovation with Horizon 2020, the LIFE program, Interreg, and so on. And the Covenant of Mayors has been expanded to support local authorities also on adaptation. We've also made considerable progress in mainstreaming climate adaptation in a lot of policies of the EU, from the Common Agricultural Policy, European investment programs, the European Network of and cohesion policy. And this has really been recognized at the global level. The Global Commission on Adaptation issued a landmark report back in September, Adapt Now, which recognized the Union as a leader, as a role model in integrating adaptation in its policymaking. For looking forward, for the new EU adaptation strategy, the situation is quite different from where the Union and the world was on adaptation 7 years ago. Nobody now questions anymore that the climate is changing, even though some use other words for it. And we've had to really expand our vocabulary to be able to talk to partners across the Atlantic, for instance, who talk about weatherization, where we talk about climate proofing and so on. Euphemisms, as the Honourable Member of Parliament was referring to this before. It's no longer also the question that we need to spend our time and money on adaptation or on mitigation. We need to do both. This is now a reality. The surprise on adaptation has rather been the speed and the extent of the change and the disruption that is happening. And over the last 6 months, starting in the spring, we've really cast a wide net in terms of public consultation, gathering inputs from experts, from member states, from other stakeholders, and from citizens. This citizen dimension has been a very pleasant surprise. We've received for the open public consultation over 1,000 reactions. This is 3 times more than what we received for the evaluation of the current strategy. And a lot of these were from citizens, not so individual citizens with individual views from all across the Union, and globally. There was a significant proportion of global respondents who really brought their views and their hopes and aspirations for the EU level action on adaptation. We've identified a lot of areas where we need to be more ambitious. We really have to spell out and operationalize the climate resilience objectives of the climate law to have Europe be resilient to climate change by 2050, also in line with the global goal on adaptation, Article 7 of the Paris Agreement. We need to strengthen efforts on climate proofing to build resilience, preparedness, and prevention, very importantly, to, again, be prepared so that we don't have to just react ex post once disaster strikes, but to avoid the problem altogether. We need to focus more on nature-based solutions because these are really multiple win solutions with a lot of co-benefits, be it from health, from recreation, from mitigation, and economic benefits as well. And we really need to provide tools to investors, to insurers, to businesses, to cities and citizens that they have access to climate relevant data, that they are empowered, they have instruments to integrate climate change into their risk management practices, even, as I said, at the citizen level. And of course, we must avoid being climate blind. And that is why all these tools that we're proposing to develop will be very helpful. The new strategy, importantly, will also have a global perspective. The current one from 2013 was exclusively domestic focus, and this somehow sends a signal about the level of preparedness and awareness that we were at in 2013. It was just starting the conversation. As I said, the climate impacts were happening elsewhere in the developing world, but now the conversation has come home to Europe. We will also integrate a lot of the recent international developments, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, the Paris Agreement. These have been coming to the forefront in the interim since 2013. The upcoming recommendations for the Common Agricultural Policy strategic plans, the CAP strategic plans, the reviews of network infrastructure regulations, or the imminent adoption of the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy are all important outlets where adaptation can be made more concrete, where adaptation can be brought closer to the front of the policy agenda, but also to the daily lives of citizens and businesses and SMEs who are now increasingly being exposed to these climate impacts. And of course, there are, as I said, close links to disaster risk management, to spatial planning, to health policy. And this is an important sort of domain that which was catapulted to the forefront of our attention, health and climate change. This was a sort of blind spot for the research community as well, and with the public policymakers, and we're trying very hard to bridge that gap at the EU level, but also globally. And last but not least, on the sort of design features of the new strategy, there will be a very important focus on adaptation and rollout of solutions. The next framework program for research and innovation, Horizon Europe, will feature a very novel instrument called Research and Innovation Mission. These modeled and inspired by the American moon landing project of the 60s. And there will be one area specifically dedicated to adaptation to climate, including societal transformation is the full title. And there will be an important vector for smarter and more accessible tools to be rolled out and also scaled up in conjunction with other funding instruments, both at the EU level, but also at the regional level, to really bring innovations off the shelf, of the labs shelves, and into the field. And it will really focus and bring considerable resources to develop, to pilot, to scale up, as I said, adaptation solutions from technological ones through nature-based ones and down to behavioral ones, because behavior will be very important. To bring it back and perhaps start the conversation on water specifically, the new EU adaptation strategy will feature, as part of its novelties, a sectoral focus on water. This is not the case for many of the other fields where adaptation is so important. And this is a recognition of the central role that water is playing on adaptation. And indeed, I've been working in this field for a long time, and I can tell you that adaptation is really touching probably the most in terms of policy areas that the EU is active on. It's really every single policy field, from gender to social justice to technological supremacy and trade. Everything has an adaptation feature. We really need to transform our societies, but water stands out. And then we've heard about this in the introduction. Too little or too much water is really where the game will be. The planet will have the same amount of water, but it will not be in the same places, and it will not be at the same times. The related lack of preparedness or the mismatch of tools are the best indicators for us that something is really wrong with our state of preparation. The most important impacts of climate change are the ones related to water: sea level rise, glacier melting, sea ice melting, permafrost, really the sort of elephant in the room, and the ticking time bomb of release of greenhouse gases, changing rainfall patterns, storm surges, cloud bursts, these really massive downpours, and of course extreme droughts. And we're getting a lot more of these and a lot more frequent ones. And projections show that the availability of fresh water across sectors will become an issue of primary importance, with links to water security, to water allocation plans, to water reuse, and drought management. This is something that we also need to look at when supporting wetland and floodplain restoration. This has important links to biodiversity, and really all of it features an underpinning data. We need to obtain relevant data on sustainable water use so as to become better informed and better aware of where action needs to be taken. It's really a question of knowledge, but also of availability of solutions, and also of adaptability and specificity of these solutions brought to the local communities where they are. We're developing at the EU level general solutions, but that need to be adopted, and these need to be embraced and owned by the local communities. And then one last issue we've also heard in the introduction on cities, making them more resilient, and how to transform the existing and the new city areas with more green infrastructures, because these absorb and they buffer large quantities of water that are linked to these increasing fluctuations in our water cycles that we have been used to deal with. We need to ensure that there's enough water to support trees and other plants. We need to have enough water for evaporation during heat waves. This is very important, linked, again, bringing it back home to our own health, because all that we're doing ultimately brings it to human vulnerability. With this, I would close. I'm very happy to hear about the feedback and the reactions and the knowledge that I will be frantically taking notes for. And you will hear in a few moments about the recent and extremely successful German presidency conference on this very topic. We took to heart and to the drawing board the main themes and the recommendations from the conference. They were grouped around mainstreaming water in EU policy and international frameworks, highlighting water-relevant issues for the new strategy.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm afraid I'm also the one who needs to keep our timing. So if you want to add a last sentence, you're welcome to do so.
I will say that I'm very happy to hear what the other interventions will be like, and I'm frantically taking notes. Thank you.
Livio, thank you very much for this very, very interesting and very ambitious keynote address, which will indeed be give us enough food for thoughts for the ongoing discussion. But now I'm really happy to introduce to you Thomas Stratenwert. Mr. Stratenwert is head of division on general European and international water management issues at the Federal Ministry of the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. Prior to that, Mr. Stratenwert was head of unit on transboundary cooperation in river basin management and international water law. And the floor is yours. We are really eager to hear your statement and maybe feedback from the conference, which was already mentioned by Livio. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. I'm also very proud to be able to present today and to give an input to your discussions. Actually, I will, after some introductory remarks, I will present some of the results from the conference just mentioned by Livio. Let's just do it to share. Okay, as Livio already touched upon, there is clear evidence nowadays that climate change is already affecting people, economies, and the environment at large in Europe. At the conference, for example, the Joint Research Center presented the results from the recent PISETA-4 study. And it was quite impressive also in terms of what kind of damages already are happening. And it's billions of euro, about 107 billion euro a year, resulting from climate change. The impacts can, in particular and mainly, be observed as changes in the water cycle. We are all aware of rising frequency and intensity and duration of droughts and floods. However, also gradual effects on water availability, quality of water, and status of water-related ecosystems are also significant and important to recognize. The indirect effects of climate change on societies and economies transmitted through changes in the water cycle are expected to result in significant welfare losses. At the same time, the use of water and water ecosystems and water management practices in other sectors have a tremendous impact on the overall resilience of water systems. So, for example, when we did our first vulnerability study in Germany, and we looked into impact change from climate effects into the different sectors, it occurred that really water was more or less the central point in that. A lot of these impact chains went through the water sectors or through the water environment. While therefore climate resilient water management is critical for overall climate resilience, other sectors need to take their share and transform their water-related practices. We need to overcome and acting in silos and enhance cooperation. In this context, we should not forget about the potential negative effects of climate change impacts in other parts of the world on the EU and its member states. Enhancing resilience in our partner countries is not only in their, but also in our interest, with a view to preventing, for example, distortion in straits, but also more people, more refugees from those areas. Incremental changes in water management, such as increasing storage capacities of urban rainwater drainage systems although important, probably won't do the job. We will need more systematic and transformative approaches, such as the sponge city concept that addresses urban planning in a much broader perspective, which may require not just innovative technical solutions, but is going to challenge also governance and financing mechanisms. The good news is that such more systematic transformational approaches offer also opportunities, technically, economically, but also, and not the least, for human well-being, due to the improved living conditions and enhanced precaution against the detrimental effects of climate change. Against this background, as already mentioned, we organized within the program of our current Council presidency, together with the Slovenian Ministry of the Environment, Spatial Planning, and the Portuguese Ministry for Environment and Climate Change, and in close cooperation with the European Commission, the conference Climate Change and the European Water Dimension Enhancing Resilience, which took place as an online event a couple of weeks ago on 4th and 5th November. There are more than 350 participants discussed, among others, a policy paper we prepared together with an international steering committee. You can see here the link where you can find both the stream of the conference and also the policy paper, the draft one, and also the background paper, which was also provided for the conference. And you see here the main strands we identified in the policy paper and where we grouped the recommendations to. And that was the issue of mainstreaming the water in the new water issues in the new adaptation strategy, and the issue of supporting resilient water management in the member states. So here I picked out these three main strands. So mainstreaming water-related climate resilience into the EU policy and international frameworks. Then the issues which need to be highlighted in the EU adaptation strategy related to water, and then aspects which are focusing on supporting member states in building water resilience. A few more words to the mainstreaming issue. As Livio already touched upon, and what the Commission is now also, I guess, striving for in the adaptation strategy and in the overall Green Deal initiative, is really to enhance the coherence and the ambition across EU policy strategies and initiatives, also with regard to adaptation. Certainly one priority there is the common agricultural policy, and now explicitly the preparation of the strategic plans by member states. And I think it's important, as Livio said, that there is guidance also from the Commission with regard to that, so that these will show up in the strategic plans. The same holds true for integrating water resilience issue into the national energy and climate plans. And also, this was just mentioned by Livio, we need to exploit synergies with the objectives of the urban agenda, the forest strategy, the biodiversity strategy, farm to fork strategy, and other things. But in order to do that, we, I guess, need further guidance and good practice examples and more exchange on that. Then another important issue is, and I think that also our honorable host mentioned that in his introductory remarks, that is the international sphere. So that we need to mainstream also water resilience into the implementation of international policy frameworks. We have to look into minimizing trade-offs with other conflicting objectives. We need to promote more synergetic effects and co-benefits, and strengthen exchange and collaboration across stakeholder communities, also at the international level. And certainly, we also need to use the instruments the EU has in hand in its development cooperation, but also in its trade and its foreign affairs activities in order to foster cooperation on climate resilience and in particular water resilience as well. And also, I think the European Parliament already touched upon these issues in particular in the past. The second strand one is highlighting water-relevant issues in the EU adaptation strategy. The EU should provide adaptation financing related to climate resilience. We also need to improve the availability of water-relevant climate services, tailor-made climate services, not just to authorities, but also to economic actors and to the citizens at large. We need to promote cross-border cooperation in climate adaptation and transnational regions and transboundary rivers and marine basins. And in particular, in our river basins, in the large river basins, the cooperation on adaptation to climate change in the water sphere is of utmost importance because we have these interlinkages with upstream and downstream societies and cities and regions. And it is not possible, let's say, to address, for example, major flood events just within borders, but you have to cooperate with that. And also with regard to addressing droughts and water scarcity, we need to think about more systematic approaches in river basins, whether that's to do it on national strategies alone. And as already said, we also need to continue and strengthen our international cooperation with vulnerable countries and major trade partners. And we in particular have to strengthen our cooperation with our direct neighbors in the neighborhood of the EU.
If I may interrupt
Yeah.
shortly, unfortunately, I have to warn you that you're already over your
Okay.
speaking time. So
okay, then I will very quickly conclude. In showing this this slide, and this is that the issue of supporting member states. That is one thing I think we should have in mind in developing the EU adaptation strategy. That was, I think, also one element of the first one, that we need to give member states advice and support in implementing adaptation and in particular water resilience measures at the national level. And this is awareness raising, this is information and data, this is research, and this is financial and regulatory instruments more intensively applied. And concluding with that, I would say that in overall, the discussion that the conference and in particular in the breakout sessions on the various recommendations showed that I think the Commission is on a good way in its thinking, as presented by Livio, and that there again in the work done there are more specific recommendations. You may look at this when the final policy paper will be out. It will be made available to the Parliament, to the Council of Regions, and also to the Council. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we are looking forward to this paper. And without further ado, I'll now move to our next speaker, which is Dr. Claudia Castel-Exner, and she's president of the European Federation on National Associations of Water Services. And Dr. Castel-Exner is also head of water management, water quality, and water usage, and coordinator of European water policies at the German Technical and Scientific Association, and member of the Drinking Water Committee of the Federal Ministry of Health in Germany. So very experienced in this field, and I'm very happy that you joined us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tiemo, for this very, very kind introduction. And I don't want to lose time, and I start immediately. Next slide, please. With a very, very brief introduction who Euro is, the European Federation of Water Services and 34 national associations of drinking water operators and wastewater operators are our members from 29 European countries. And of course, drinking water and wastewater services are essential services, and we realize really the human right to water and sanitation and protect human health and the environment. Although these are services the water sector is providing since more than 150 years, the challenges we are facing are enormous. Next slide, please. And this leads me to the nexus of water services and climate change. Although urban water services only account for 12% of the total water used in the EU, as the EEA stated, we are significantly affected by climate change, by droughts, floods, raising temperatures, and raising sea levels. Next slide, please. I'd like to mention three main impacts of climate change on water services. There is quality and quantity to be first mentioned. So quality is an issue, maybe, for example, of surface waters. Due to low flow and then less dilution, pollution can increase in surface waters in dry periods. And so the raw water has to be widely treated accordingly. Or when you look at the quantity issue, it is a problem and a topic for the capacity of groundwater aquifers to recharge, or as you see in these two photos, when we look at the drinking water reservoir, for example, this is an example from the western part of Germany, which really fall dry in the 2018 period. There are as well impacts on the management of the water cycle. So water operators have to ensure minimum water discharges in surface water when running, for example, a drinking water reservoir, like you see this here on this photo. And this is not always feasible in dry periods to sustain the receiving waters with the necessary volumes of water. Next slide. And another really, really major impact is really on the operation of water infrastructure. And I really want to share here with you really the situation we are facing. And this is, for example, a case in the 2018 period where water suppliers were really facing a high utilization rate of their facilities. This is an example for a water treatment capacity, more than 90%. So this is really stress. This is really stress and challenges for every engineer in every waterworks to know that his facilities are extremely used, not only for days, not only for weeks, but as we faced it in 2018 and 2019, over months. Next slide, please. Having shown you these impacts, I think you can see that building resilience, building robustness of water infrastructure is for us a really top priority to ensure water services sustainability now and in the years to come. As a water sector, we can technically come quite far with taking measures. However, we need support to create the right environment to do so. To be clear, we cannot make this on our own. We need political leadership and good multi-level governance at EU, national and local level to implement solutions that make our services robust and resilient. Next slide, please. Let me now talk about, and let's have a look at the new adaptation strategy and the things which are very, very important for us. So we really call on a strong focus to protect water resources in quantity and in quality terms. We also like to highlight to give a focus on nature-based solutions to prevent too much water from reaching the sewers when there are heavy rainfalls, for example. We see as well water reuse to be a crucial element. So we support the regulation of water reuse for irrigation purposes. And we also look forward to a future discussion on the topic, which quality of water for which uses. We also need, and there should be, clear governance structures. So the roles and responsibilities of all actors involved should be clearly defined at all various levels, as I said, on EU, national, and local levels. And also to mention a proper implementation of the cost recovery principle. This is really crucial to protect water resources and make sure that all users, including industry, including energy, including agriculture, pay for the water they use. And we do see a momentum, a really momentum to encourage member states to set up priority schemes for water use in drought situations. We see these in the national legislations, for example, in Spain, in Czech Republic, or in the Netherlands, and we do hope that other countries will follow and give drinking water provision a top priority in their national law. And last but not least, we really see and would like to encourage member states to adopt the drought management plans. They are voluntary instruments at the time being, but they complement the river basin management plans very, very well. Next slide, please. Let me conclude with a reference to the work of the ENVI committee. We welcome the work. We support the amendments that add a focus to the water dimension, and we hope that these amendments will be taken up in the negotiations and in the compromise amendments, and of course, that we really see a reference to the water dimension in the final text of the resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation and for keeping the foreseen time. So this brings us closer to our schedule, and I'm very happy to invite or introduce now Sachiko Shima. She's the Deputy Director and Head of Water at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. And she also serves in various governing boards of the World Water Council and the CIGAR's Water Land Ecosystem, and on steering committees in agri environment of the OECD and UNEP Global Partnerships. She has nearly 30 years of experience in international assistance and policy development in agriculture, water, and environmental natural resource management. And that's why I'm very happy that you joined us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much for that introduction. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here. And thanks to the Honorable MEP and the organizers. I will jump right into my presentation to share my PowerPoint. Okay, I will mention some of the adaptation options in agriculture sector, particularly through integrated demand side water management as well as supply side strategies. Water and climate change are two sides of the same coin, and many of the impacts of climate change will be felt through the water cycle as mentioned before. We wanted to recognize that 80% of the impacts of drought is absorbed by the agriculture sector, by the rural producers. And this is going to get more acute and more urgent. As we see, the global water use has increased by a factor of 6-fold over the past 100 years, and it will continue to grow due to increasing population, economic development, and also shifting consumption patterns to more meat-based diets. Changes in precipitation and temperature will directly affect the water budgets of countries. And convergent results are showing that fundamentally this would also change food production as a function of water availability. And as we already heard, it will be more extreme precipitation and also more frequent and extreme drought as well. For the agriculture, the first we need to adapt with more frequent water scarcity and excess rainfall or floods. And the second is to decarbonize agriculture through the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and also to enhance water availability. As we heard from the MEP, we need to look at adaptation and mitigation collectively when we deal with agriculture. And the second, to decarbonize, we are looking at smart agricultures, and that looks at the agriculture, the forestry, and other land use changes integrated to estimate and account for the 23% of greenhouse gas emissions today. And the scope of adaptation in rain-fed agriculture, and that's majority of agriculture around the world, is largely determined by crop varieties to cope with temperature changes and also the soil water deficits. And irrigation, of course, provides a key to adaptation when there is no rain, and there have been advances in drip irrigation and many other water savings technologies. In terms of mitigation of greenhouse gases, a lot of our focus is on carbon sequestration through forests, through soil organic content to bring the fertility back to the soils, and also nutrient cycling and emission reduction through other integrated land and water management, including the adoption of solar pumps for groundwater irrigation. And the climate smart agriculture collectively shown in this graph incorporates all of this land and water management, agroecosystem, agroecology, soil conservation, and agronomic practices that combines forestry with crops and to sequester carbon and reduce greenhouse emissions, as well as the multiple benefits of soil organic matter and also soil moisture to prevent desertification and expansion of that. In precision agriculture is one of the technology in digital information, applying the big data from FAO data labs, such as Aquastat, FileStat on various countries and key staple crops, geospatial maps, remote sensed information. And this has enabled us to deliver the information to smallholder farmers. And the smallholder farmers are the access points. This is the access to cell phones for them to enable decisions on profitability of their land. And today there are 570 million farms in the world, and 87% of them are family farms of less than 2 hectares. So it is really important for us to get the big data down to the farmers. WAPR is one of the FAO's water productivity, the open access database. This was launched in June of 2019. It uses near real-time satellite-based remote sensing to gather data on biomass and water consumption. So it actually measures the evapotranspiration of the crop, that the crop through the leaves, what is transpired and what is being evaporated. It is really a phenomenal and a very powerful indicator of agricultural water consumption. So if you are talking about saving priorities of water and clean water for drinking water, how do we account for agricultural water consumption through this type of tools is very, very powerful to optimize the water use for the specific crop. Again, we use this and we've been able to deliver it to the farm level, to even for the farmers and extension workers in remote parts of Africa, to assess farm productivity, the yield, and also with the weather and water patterns, one can predict and exchange information between farms about pests and diseases, and also to prevent that as well. Informatics on early warning and drought, early warning system on food and agriculture. The JUICE is another database portal we have. On SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals and running to the 2030 agenda, besides climate change and data informatics that I've mentioned for informed decision and policy making, there's also the climate smart agriculture in terms of crop varieties and other adaptation strategies that are suitable in marginal environments. Since most of our environments have expanded in terms of farmlands, reversing the marginal environments to salt-tolerant crops, drought-tolerant crops with salinity, et cetera, it's very attractive right now. And alternative varieties, including nutritious crops such as quinoa. And we provide the best practices in land management with technical support and advice to many of our member states. And the use of alternative non-conventional waters. And I'm very glad to hear that the EU is expanding and promoting that and various policies that are coupled together to address the Sustainable Development Goals. I wanted to mention the modular farm as a climate resilience policy in integrating agri and aquaculture in the multi-component modular farms. This can recycle the water from one system to the next and able to perform better under climate change conditions. And it's also important to enhance food, nutrition security by providing the multiple source of food categories from vegetables to fish, except to livestock. And they are innovative because of the unconventional plants are irrigated with low quality waters. Last year, towards the end, FAO and the government in Spain co-hosted the International Symposium for the Use of Non-Conventional Waters for Achieving Food Security. Again, this is looking at fit for purpose, the different types of water and how they can be applied for achieving food security. This includes reclaimed wastewater, desalinated water, brackish water, rainwater through fog, clouds, and harvesting through our, we have a project on million cisterns in Africa, water harvesting technologies, etc. And many of the coalition that many of the European members are trying to promote in the food coalition is the public-private sectors in finding innovative blended finance in opportunities for scaling up for non-conventional water uses. I wanted to mention some of the climate change adaptation in terms of water-related infrastructure. Here is the reservoir of dams, but we're also looking at the lowland, the coastal reservoirs, which does not need such heavy infrastructure, concrete walls, but just a barrier that will prevent the seawater and the fresh water coming out from our rivers and cities that are before they get mainly to capture stormwater. So the coastal reservoirs, we're having a webinar next Wednesday to discuss that as an adaptation strategy. In many regions of the world, groundwater aquifers present the largest storage capacity, and using various reclaimed water as well as the coastal reservoir water can prevent saltwater and saline intrusion in coastal aquifers. We're looking at wastewater treatment plant in terms of reuse as well as the wetlands. We talked a lot about the forest, but the wetlands takes into account of the multiple co-benefits as well as carbon sequestration that is twice as high as forest carbon sequestration. So water energy nexus, the optimization of the trade-offs in food production vis-a-vis the other sectors need to be taken into consideration. So we look forward to the EU recommendations in this aspect. We're already looking at solar pumps, but reducing food loss and food waste is a significant policy of ours. As it has a lot of repercussions on the water energy demand, as you can see here.
I'm sorry that
Okay, I'm wrapping up. Yes.
Yeah.
So water is, this is the last slide. Water is the climate connector that allows for greater collaboration across the different agendas of, SDGs, the Paris Agreement, as well as the Sendai framework. However, water has not been emphasizing any of those to date. So very glad to hear the EU is moving momentum on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Me personally, I was very much looking into the big data thing because I see there a lot of potential. So thank you very much, and I hope we are coming back to that during the Q&A session. And I now pass the floor to Mr. Piotr Kabecki. He is the president of the Kujawsko-Pomorskaya region. I hope this was close at least. Since 2006, he is the European Committee of the Regions rapporteur on the Water Framework Directive and Floods Directive. Moreover, he participates in the works of the Green Deal Going Local working group created by the Council of Regions, and he has a long time experience in water management, flood protection, and climate adaptation. So we are very much looking forward to your contribution, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Wölken, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your invitation to this intergroup event. In this difficult moment of global pandemic, where citizens' health and recovery are at the top of our agenda, we need to make sure that whatever we do, we act together. Here in Brussels, we discuss future laws to streamline our actions towards the same objective: a prosperous and climate-proof Europe. But real life happens on the ground, as we know, where fields suffer from drought, forests are burning, homes get flooded, and the cities down in heat, desperately looking for water. We observe dramatic effects of climate change everywhere, but also in Poland. I see clearly in my region impact by drought, hurricane winds, and heavy intensive storms causing flooding. The winters in Poland, as in Europe, on the north part of our continent, are not longer frosty, and summers are hot as never before. Forest, agriculture, and biodiversity, so crucial for climate, are under threat. As local regional authorities, we are the first to provide our citizens with clean water and sanitation. Spatial planning, infrastructure, agriculture, transport, housing, water management, flood protection, and finally adaptation to climate change are all in our hands. Every day, we face challenge and look for solutions to respond better and more quickly to the disasters caused by climate change. To be ready, 40% of European cities have created their adaptation plans, urban tailored solution, and support from the EU and member states. Our Committee of the Regions created this year the Green Deal Going Local group, where climate adaptation and water management are among the priorities. In just a few weeks, we have collected 200 low-carbon projects from all over Europe, and this is not over yet. Why do we do it? because we want to lead our communities to a green future and play a powerful role in the European path to climate neutrality. We want to share experiences and replicate best practical and on the ground. So our committee stands ready to provide its political support in the implementation of the Climate Pact. Climate change does not wait. The management of water resources is key for the climate adaptation. To do it properly, we also need coordination between countries, as water does not know borders. We need joint long-term vision, common objectives, and contingency plans to deal with disasters together. Through a strong system of governance and building our adaptation strategies together at local, regional, national, European, and finally United Nations level, we can develop efficient climate and water policies which are tailored for each territory and which best respond to the challenges we face. We need less civil thinking on the water and greater coherence with EU legislation when dealing with climate change, the circular economy, and emerging pollutants. We need to focus on the implementation for Water Framework Directive, ensuring that climate resilient water management is streamlined into other policies, and that the new EU adaptation strategy will be both bold and ambitious. And finally, we need appropriate funding. Local and regional level need direct access to green recovery funds, and the 37% pool earmarked for climate neutral investment. Climate transformation requires stable and systematic public financing for adaptation, but also private investment in infrastructure. A new long-term budget focused on the greener and a carbon-free Europe should provide adequate funding opportunities at all governance levels and empower local authorities in the management of EU national, regional, and local funds. We need more data, research, and digital solutions available to all new technologies and exchange of practice. We also need to exploit the opportunities created by eco-hydrology and nature-based solutions. Those are effective tools, especially for mitigating intermediate impacts such as non-profit source pollutions from agriculture and urban areas that generate about 50% of pollutions in some catchment areas. Restoration and expansion of wetlands in another opportunity. What do we do on the ground? At the local level, we must set common goals involving all partners in joint projects, ensuring intervention goes in the same direction and the use of funds is optimized. We need resilient system and a holistic approach to water and sewage planning, intelligent warning system for extreme rainfall, and better preparedness for flooding. The impact of climate on water resource has a cumulative effect. When paradigm based on scientific advice will help local and regional authorities to make the best policy choices. That is
I'm sorry that
why
I
cooperation
have to
with scientists
come in here, but I
is
would
so
remind
important.
you.
So, for the end, I would like to say that the European Green Deal opens a new door for us and provides a coherent vision based on the solid interdisciplinary framework. Let us that vision to transform our societies and make Europe the best place to live in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the perspective, and I think the perspective of the European Committee of the Regions is very important, especially on this issue. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. And our next speaker is Sergei Moras. He is Policy Manager for Water and Biodiversity at the European Environmental Bureau. Before joining the EEB, he was a Policy Director for the European Water Partnership as well as for WWF on a range of projects from river restoration to advocacy for ambitious EU laws. So it's my pleasure to pass the mic to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. And I'm very helpful. I'm very grateful to be able to contribute to this very important debate. And I'm also very, very happy that European Commission already indicated that water will be a focal sector in the upcoming EU adaptation strategy. I don't need to repeat it. These points were made very, very validly before, that we are really feeling climate change impacts through water, and we need to focus on both mitigating and really stopping the climate crisis that we are heading into, but we also need to adapt and also speed up doing that because the action since the 2013 strategy has not been adequate. Just maybe 2 words about the organization on behalf of which I'm speaking. European Environmental Bureau is an umbrella organization for civil society organizations across Europe, both within EU and outside, and we have about 160 member organizations and stand for environmental protection and democracy and justice. So the topic of climate change and adaptation to climate change is very relevant to the core of the organization that I represent. And as also somebody mentioned, when we talk about adaptation, I have to talk to a lot of colleagues that are involved in this, from climate change mitigation to biodiversity to health, etc. So the topic is extremely broad, but water is definitely key and fundamental part of it. So again, I'm happy to see that there will be an additional focus on water as part of the adaptation strategy. There are a couple of key messages I would like to pass also in reaction to what we've heard from the other panelists. And the first one is really, we already have a number of tools and legislation that exists that allow us to adapt, and we should use and build on them better. And that's primarily the Water Framework Directive, the Floods Directive when it comes to water. Claudia mentioned under the Water Framework Directive, you can do drought management plans. So you can prepare for droughts, and as part of the implementation of the WFD. The European Commission had just concluded a 2-year fitness check evaluation of the legislation and concluded that it is broadly fit for purpose. It can deal with new challenges like climate change adequately. So it really is about doing that now. You know, since the previous climate adaptation strategy that German presidency organized back in 2000 and put the issue on the table, there were tools already provided since then to member states how climate change can be integrated and needs to be integrated in the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. There was a guidance document on that. That is one of the points to be included in river basin management plans. And now that those plans are being prepared and ready for public consultation, we really want to see more progress on that in the third cycle. So implementation is absolutely crucial. WFD will not be amended. It allows us to deal with those emerging challenges, and we really need to focus on progress. And again, I support the point that somebody made. We really need to focus on nature-based solutions in the implementation of the WFD. Extremely crucial also to help us mitigate climate change, floodplains, peatlands, store carbon, and really then allow us to mitigate. So it's not just forests, it's also freshwater ecosystems that are playing that absolutely crucial role. And if we implement the WFD correctly and ambitiously, it is about increasing our resilience through increasing health of those ecosystems. There will also be additional help on this. The European Commission, as part of the EU biodiversity strategy, has committed to come up with legally binding restoration targets, and we really argue those should really focus on ecosystems that are important both for biodiversity and climate, peatlands, floodplains, old growth forests, coasts, and also need to include specific target on restoring rivers as currently put forward in the biodiversity strategy. So absolutely crucial that those legally binding targets, that new legislation on restoration drives an ambitious push for nature-based solutions for restoration of ecosystems to help us also adapt to climate change, but also manage water better. Those are perfect natural water storage and green infrastructure. Water storage through freshwater ecosystems is absolutely fundamental. Somebody was making a point as well on the tools that are needed for member states to do adaptation better, and some tools are still needed. There is now, as we were introduced, there is a growing awareness from citizens, from other stakeholders, how important water is, how important it is to be prepared and manage those extreme drought events. So, tools in terms of how to allocate water better are definitely needed. But I would also argue that in some cases, tools are just not enough. We need to be finally prepared and take tough decisions about how we control water abstraction. I think it is a disgrace that we still have illegal boreholes across the countries that are experiencing droughts and water scarcity, and we know them. We're using EU satellite systems to identify them, but we're doing nothing about stopping them. So it also is time, whether it is in order to restore the health of the freshwater ecosystems or whether to increase our resilience to help us adapt to climate change, or whether it's to really build on those important links between nature and health, which is so important during the pandemics that we are all experiencing. But, it doesn't matter why we're doing it, and we can do them for all these reasons at the same time, but I think it's really time to control abstraction better, to really show who is using water, to really show and then really also bring the important element of using economic instruments better, which are already put forward under the Water Framework Directive. So when we're also showing who is polluting, who is using water, we also make those tough decisions who needs to pay for water, because and for the improvements of water bodies. And through the polluter pays principle, those costs need to be put on those who actually pollute in this context as well. I'll quickly move on, maybe just also two quick points. One is about the mainstreaming, also absolutely crucial, and maybe just one example here, and relates to the presentation that we've heard before. The mainstreaming between water and agriculture and biodiversity is absolutely fundamental, and I think, again, we welcome the fact that CAP strategic plans are identified as a tool in synergy with the river basin management plans to start delivering on that. But I can't not mention the fact that at the moment, the CAP reform is currently being discussed in Brussels, is really not adequate to the Green Deal ambitions. What the European Parliament voted for and what the discussions are among the member states are currently falling short and diluting some of the important elements like eco schemes that have been put forward that had a potential to really make a change through common agricultural policy. So at the moment, we just don't see progress on that going far enough to match the Green Deal ambitions. So we're actually asking the European Commission to withdraw the proposal, make it compatible with Green Deal and start negotiations again, because at the moment we're going to lose another 7 years of broken CAP if it is not reformed properly. And as somebody mentioned, time is really of the essence. We have a decade in which transformational changes need to happen. Otherwise, we will be saying again, we've been caught by surprise how fast climate change is happening and how unprepared we are. And maybe just I can see the chairman is indicating that I'm running out of time. So my quick and final point on financing, again, absolutely crucial. I already said we need to use the economic instrument provisions that we have in the WFD much, much better than we currently do, but also really make sure that recovery and resilience plans and the budget are really helping us with adaptation, with better water management. And also we really need to make sure that we don't throw money into the bad projects that will limit our resilience. And an example there is we really don't think we need more new hydropower, for example. I know we need renewables based on the studies that we've carried out. We can reach our climate objectives without new hydropower by improving the existing hydropower capacity. But new hydropower, in a way, they only limit our resilience also to adapt to climate change in a way, and we should be avoiding throwing money into the bad projects that only limit our capacity to adapt. And I think these were my key points, but I'll come probably back in some of the questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And in order to have time for questions at the end, I have to be quite strict. So sorry for that. But thank you very much for this very direct and very lively presentation and points noted. Our next speaker today is Dr. Maria Helena Ramos. She is president of the Hydrological Science Division of European Geoscience Union and also member of the Scientific Steering Committee for the World Weather Research Program of the World Meteorological, it's always a problem for me to pronounce that, organization. Moreover, Dr. Ramos is a research scientist in hydrology, hydrometeorology. I don't know why I can't pronounce these, at the French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and the Environment. And I hope the floor is yours, and sorry for the hiccup during the pronunciation.
Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me, sorry. I have some background noise from my neighbors, so I'm sorry if ever there is some noise coming during my speak. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for being here. So I'm a hydrometeorologist, a researcher in France, and the president of the EGU Division on Hydrological Science, and I'm talking about the name of EGU today. Who we are, so we are a leading organization for Earth, planetary, and space science research in Europe. We have about 20,000 members from all over the world, and we organize meetings, and we have publications, scientific publications, awards, and outreach and education, and also a working group on science and policy. And we are 22 divisions, scientific divisions at EGU, and I'm mainly leading the water division, the hydrological sciences division, and water in geosciences is vast, a very broad field. So we have what we call the watershed, so all that is happening on the surface water, but also all that's happening on underground water. And we also have what is related to observation data, remote sensing, to help forecasting in near time, but also to help in planning. A lot of social hydrology, so eco-hydrology, social hydrology, that there are fields that are coming more and more often, and getting robust techniques and the science also behind it. So it's a matter of natural process, but also a matter of people behind this natural process, studying it and making decisions. In terms of climate change adaptation in the water sector, I think that it's redundant to say that changes in precipitation, including snow, we have to think about it also that, and temperature that affect the water cycle. This is just an example of a study that has been published recently, or in 2013, I think. So it's about precipitation projected change in the summer period for the late 21st century. So this is a way to illustrate how we have to look at the global scale, even if you wanted to know something about a country or a region, because processes are related at several scales, from global to local scales. So we see that significant change from today in summer precipitation, for instance, this is from this paper, they show that they are due to circulation regimes. So we are changing things at global scale that affect local and regional climate and water. But there are uncertainties about the amplitude, about how this the signal of change, and they remain large. So what I would like to emphasize in this slide is that this part of the uncertainty that will always be there, and that you have to learn how to deal with them, to visualize them, to use them to make our decisions. And besides uncertainties that we can affect data, the climate models and the water models, we also have the impacts also that are uncertain today. And these impacts are even harder to evaluate when we think about the river basins as objects that integrate climate process, but also human activities inside the catchments, either very urbanized or more natural catchments. So these different impacts also at different levels. And this is also another research group that have been studied the irrigation, impacts on irrigation at the global scale, and the irrigation water demand using global hydrological models. So these models can give us an idea of what's happening at larger scales. And it's also, they have seen also an increased trend in the future demand for irrigation. So it's supply and demand that are the both sides of the story that we need to evaluate. And also that they mentioned about climate change that not only increasing this irrigation water demand, but also shifting its seasonality. So this is an important aspect for us to understand that impacts or adaptations at one time and space, they also may shift. So they have to extend, we have to extend our knowledge from impact and adaptation from one time period to another, and also spatially. Issues concerning this adaptation is very important for hydropower, for instance. It's not only a matter of how much, but also when things are going to happen. And this is particularly important when we're talking about hydropower from reservoirs, for instance, because these are where we can use water not only for producing of electricity, but also for agriculture and other users, tourism, for instance, and environmental protection. So multi-usage reservoirs are more and more often being solicited with the situations of climate change. And this is, means that we have been requesting use of water at different time periods, but we have also demanded that change in shift in time. So things that we may think that we can cope with, it may depend on how we manage this availability of water. So some practices, what we have been seeing is that some practices have to turn into multi-sectoral co-benefit analysis. So we can find this potential for win-win situations. This was a work done by this IMPREX project, an European project, where we could see that even if some changes in climate would not affect how the hydropower produces their energy, but they could also contribute to support other uses by taking into account the impacts on other sectors. So how the hydropower managers can take into account impacts on other sectors to better manage their reservoirs and come up to these win-win situations. So this requires really something more flexible water management during this period among these different sectors. And it's not only tools that need to be flexible, I would say. It's flexible to go through time, for instance, from short-term operations to long-term plannings, but also people that need also to be flexible. We have seen in our challenges this multi-sectoral responsibility approach that needs to be fostered. So we need more sectors integrating their approach, their tools, their data, but also the way they reason water management, the way they make their decisions, how this impact other sectors. And impacts are already being felt throughout a range of sectors. We have seen about that. Practitioners and stakeholders, they are already dealing with this transition period, going from the past, the baseline where we more or less know what we are dealing with, how are we management, to a future of project changes where we have large uncertainties, but where some of the changes we know about snow or precipitation, we know something that can improve our management in the future. But this transition period that we're going through is sometimes a period that is very difficult to handle with the current tools we have. So how versatile, how flexible are our tools and practices is a question that as scientists and dealing with science and operations we have to ask. How flexible are our tools and practices in management, but also in risk assessment for floods and droughts. These interdependencies and interlinkages where we are prone to be explored among sectors, and they can also make us think about how are we ourselves and our stakeholders thinking about this adaptation strategy. These are two quotes that I heard during a project I participated to a long time ago. So from one side, people saying, oh, we don't worry about that. We have always adapted. We will always adapt. So with questions, are we being too confident on that? Or from the other side, stakeholders or managers saying, well, we have read our management rules and this cannot be changed. So are you being also too rigid in what we're doing? So how can we improve this balance between not being too confident, not being too rigid, and look closely more to what can be in the future and how we can adapt, being more flexible in the tools and ourselves also, the way our behavior science can act here. All of this has, of course, an important role for scientists, for science, and for the scientific unions as EGU represents. These are people that are in a good position to move from knowledge to solutions, and also from what is happening today and what will happen tomorrow. So we can work closely. These are scientists that are working closely with local needs. They can have global data, global models, but they always have their users at local needs. And they are also scientists with long careers. So career and long-lasting engagement is also important to move from these periods, from what we know from the past, where we are living now in the transitions periods, and what we have for tomorrow. These, I do believe scientists are bridges that can lead us, help us to link global to local data and models, links that we could enhance and facilitate with scientists at the EU level, for instance, from the Joint Research Center, and also science that can help in scaling up adaptation solutions, so we can ensure that the actions that we do in one sector do not end up canceling actions that are done in another section, which make us think about all the holy spirit of evaluation, how we evaluate what we are doing, especially we are doing something for the future that we are not yet there, we don't know yet how it's going to happen. So how do we evaluate today that the actions we are doing in one sector are not canceling the actions in another section, but are also contributing in a multi-sectoral approach. So going out from retreat and inaction in face of climate change and moving through advance and action, what can we do now and what we can continue be doing in the future in a dynamic way. Was what I had to say. I know you're a little bit late, so I hope I was not very fast. So if you need more information about TGU, so you have here some links and references, and we are eager to work in this interface science and policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Helena. No, your timing was perfect. So thank you very much for your contribution and for your presentation. And before we move to the Q&A session, we will hear two interventions or two reactions by two MEP colleagues. The first one is Mr. Wölken. He is a member of the European Parliament for the Greens, and inter alia, a member of the Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety. And he is a meteorologist and climate expert by profession, and has been working with different aspects of the climate issue for the last 30 years. And I practiced to pronounce this word. I hope you all understand it. And the floor is yours for 4 to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Tiemo. It's good to practice. It's a tricky word, meteorologist. I can pronounce it a bit wrong myself now and then in English. And thank you very much for all the energy and inspiration from Liviu at GG Climate Action all the way through Maria Helena at EGU. It's for me, it's almost a bit schizophrenic working in the parliament. I'm a meteorologist, climate expert, having worked with these issues for 20 to 25 years, but new in the parliament. And it is a bit schizophrenic almost, because sometimes during a morning like this, for 2 hours, everyone is talking about the urgency, everyone is aware of the critical situation. And then another day, another week, you're into some discussion that it seems that most of the participants are not even aware of the urgency of the situation. So thank you very, very much. There's a lot of you that has mentioned that similar things that I was going to say, but I really want to stress it anyhow, that I mean, the need of climate adaptation that we have right now is unfortunately a proof of the global society's act of mitigation. And I really think that we need to connect adaptation and mitigation all the time, because we must never believe that adaptation in itself can solve the climate crisis, although of course it's very, very urgent and necessary. Not the least when it comes to water, the hydrological cycle, as a lot of you have mentioned. I mean, it's possible that we may, at least in parts of Europe, can adopt to another degree of warming if we're just looking at the temperature, but the effects on the hydrological cycle will be very, very severe. Of course, everything is connected, but water really stands out. We will see a situation, a future where we have too much water in certain areas and too less water in other areas. And as a few of you have mentioned, permafrost thawing, changing rainfall patterns, and not the least what we've seen this season at the Atlantic Ocean with much more energy in the tropical hurricanes. And the resilience to climate change is, of course, getting weaker and weaker for every 10th of degree of global warming, which is probably the single most important reason why we need to limit the heating and, of course, the emissions as much as possible. And we really need to prioritize everything concerned with climate, not only in, for example, the two committees where I'm a member, Envy and Agri, but in all political areas, not the least in the budget discussions we're having during next week. And not the least also when it comes to food production and agriculture, and I will return to that by the end of my short speech. Basically, I think we need a much more systemic perspective because water is obviously the core part of life and the functioning of the ecosystems. And by contributing to climate change, it's nature itself which we are destroying. But nature is also what will save us, hopefully, not only through mitigation, but also adaptation. And therefore, the new biodiversity strategy came with good news about the intention to invest more in nature. And that is really needed to build resilience to climate change and to maintain the ecosystem services which our society and economy is built upon. For example, the new biodiversity strategy comes with good news on restoration of at least 25,000 kilometers of rivers into free-flowing rivers by 2030 through the removal of primarily obsolete barriers and the restoration of floodplains and wetlands, which is very, very, very important. And then also, of course, agriculture. We need to be able to talk about the elephant in the room to bring back more nature in agricultural landscape, providing storm protection and to reduce pressure on water demand, often connected to meat and dairy products. In any case, the adaptation strategy can become good, but without massive investments in the restoration of nature and biodiversity, we will not come far enough. We had a chance, a big chance, when revising the CAP, but didn't come far enough. I'm very good that Sergei from EEB mentioned that the CAP was a big chance that we had, and I still hope that we will be able somehow to make it more progressive, because it's not at all in line with the green
Per, may I ask you to come to an end so that we have time for questions?
Yeah, that was the end. I really wanted to just mention the need of a more progressive CAP, and because that's 7 years of more of the 20th century agricultural politics, and that is not what we need. We need a more progressive agriculture.
I totally agree.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your highlighting that the CAP needs to be more ambitious, and I really agree. So the second intervention is by my colleague Petros Koukalis. He is a member for the GUE, and he is also a member of the Environment Committee and a substitute in the Budget Committee and the Agri Committee and in the Committee on Fisheries. And he's the co-founder of the organization Earth, a Greek non-for-profit organization set up to provide answers to modern social concerns about society and the environment. And Petros, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tiemo, and thanks for the intergroup for this wonderful morning. Like Par said, actually meteorology sounds easier in Greek, meteorologos. So this morning has been a very comprehensive review of what's adaptation issue. So to begin with working with Par as co-sponsors in the adaptation draft motion resolution, trying to put, and I think we're going to see a lot of the water-related issues in the adaptation issues. I would just like to dwell for this next few minutes on the mitigation versus adaptation discussion. I think that at this point now, where we are already at 1.1 degree global warming, and at the best case scenario, we will hold it at 1.5 scenario, we are looking at life on a different world. In a world where none of our infrastructure, either physical or non-physical or soft infrastructure, which is like fire departments and civic protection organizations, are not designed to deal with. So adaptation is our major our major work ahead in the political. And I think that the idea that resilience is the main goal of the Recovery and Resilience Fund is a very good one. And I think that resilience is the word that we should be using now for adaptation, which includes economic, social, and ecological resilience. So what about the finance? I think that in the taxonomy regulation that has the adaptation side is very important. However, we have a big problem in the way that we account for the climate budget, and especially mainstreaming the climate budget. We call for the 30% percentage of the budget to be spent on climate action, which includes mitigation and adaptation, but does not make a distinction within it, what goes for climate and what goes for adaptation. So I think I think that one of the most critical elements here is to find ways to finance adaptation in both in public and private ways. Now, closing with the water as the climate connector, which in terms of climate change comes to us in disaster threats, but also in threatening our drinking and eating patterns, which is very central. And in that sense, in the sense of agriculture, we had this tremendous miss of opportunity with the CAP as the Parliament. Not proud for this voting of the Parliament, but I think that now we have to focus on the strategic plans once we come out of the trilogue, and focus on the national strategic plans and make sure that the national strategic plans follow the national adaptation plans. And to close, I would like to say that I'm very keen to follow the Green Deal Goes local effort by the ECOSOC, and to see how we can match the local and regional adaptation plans with not only water problems, but all kinds of adaptations and resilience issues. So thank you very much for this inspiring discussion this morning, and I'm looking forward to the questions and answers.
Petros, thank you very much for your statement, and we now turn to our Q&A session, and I'm happy to donate minutes from my closing remarks to this session, so we can answer as much questions as possible. But I would invite our panelists to provide short answers. So the first question I can see is from Chloe. She dedicated a question to Maria Helena. You mentioned the need for us scientists to work across disciplines. How could intersectoral disciplines work be more encouraged, or encouraged more?
Thank you for the question. I think that we have always learned to be in one discipline and be expert in one discipline. As an old scientist as I am, I'm talking about myself, but I have seen that the new generation is much more multidisciplinary in their way of thinking, their way of building their own education and their own path for research. So I think that this is much easier for them today to work in multidisciplinary issues and then work with multisectoral issues. What is more complicated, I think, is to find the right people to work in the right sectors that they can talk to each other in one unique project of a very short, like say, time period. I think this is how I see things today, that we have to move from this one discipline, to move into how disciplines interact. And this goes through the curricula in education and also to the message we convey after when we communicate our own research. I don't know if it answers the... I'm not getting Tiemo anymore, but
no.
Okay.
Now, okay, I couldn't unmute myself, so thank you very much for unmuting me. I don't know why it didn't work. Let's stay with questions on the aspect of science. And there's one question dedicated to the Commission, to Livio. You mentioned Horizon Europe, but how will the future strategy impact the LIFE program, especially on water-related aspects? So as former member of the budget committee, I'm also quite keen on your answer to this question.
Many thanks for the opportunity to respond to this. LIFE will continue to be a key player, will continue to play a key role in adaptation. We've just launched a much increased portfolio of budgets this week. A lot of them on adaptation with them from the current LIFE program, and in the future one, the same. We will continue to use LIFE as a major supporter. And themes such as water we're already doing it, but we'll continue to do that. And that's something that maybe should be clarified with the adaptation strategy, that we will build on the current one. There's a huge part of the consultation, whether to drop anything, but the resounding reply was no, we need to build on it. I'll just like to mention the fact that Horizon Europe will bring even more resources than LIFE itself. Horizon Europe is a big program, and there will be dedicated water research and water innovation. I mentioned this mission. The mission identifies water as an area to bring these funding and also tie them together in interdisciplinary fashion, to link back to the previous question. And last but not least, the private sector funding is also very important, and with developments like the taxonomy for sustainable finance, where adaptation is featured as one of the 6 criteria, this will pull in and bring in and incentivize a lot more funding from the private sector. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your answer. And let's maybe continue with a question or a comment to Mr. Morris. So the one who asked the question fully agrees that the CAP is crucial. As it stands, water resources availability is not sufficiently reflected. Indeed, would be wise to steer into account water efficiency. Do you have an idea how this would be done?
No, I very much welcome the comments. Thank you, Ad. And I think efficiency is very, very important, and we definitely need to look at kind of increasing water efficiency. In this particular case, I actually disagree that it would make sense to link subsidies to efficiencies. We should we should not subsidize something that does harm. So we should link to the health or to the status of those water bodies where that abstraction is happening. Because nobody has cancelled the Jevons paradox when it comes to natural resources. If you are focusing only on efficiency and are investing in more and more efficiency, it doesn't always lead to the reduction in the resource use. We've seen that happening in Spain and other member states. The huge investments that happened in the efficiency of irrigation didn't necessarily result in the improvements of the water bodies, and over abstraction have not been solved because in those increases and reductions in water that saved water went into more irrigation, into more, it was very efficient irrigation, but nevertheless, the ecosystem still stayed in bad, over abstracted status in a way. So don't link subsidies to, I'm not denying that efficiency is important. It's just that we need to put efficiency in the context of allocation, and we shouldn't be throwing subsidies for damaging activities. Do no harm principle of the European Green Deal is absolutely fundamental. So payment to farmers we shouldn't be paying them for doing damaging activities to the ecosystem. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your answer. And I would like to invite Sasha to come in on this question as well, as I can see that she provided an answer in the Q&A tool. And there is also a question directed to her on the buffer for summer droughts, and the question is, in several parts in the world and in Europe, groundwater depletion is already happening. So if you would like to come in on those 2 points.
Yes, many of the solutions of water is actually outside of the sector. So this is a very interesting question to really look at it from a multi-sectoral point of view for groundwater depletion. Many times this is related to, again, impervious roads, surfaces in which rainwater, stormwater just doesn't get trickled down to the groundwater aquifers. So this is related to infrastructure planning of urban cities. As I mentioned in my response, the green infrastructure and rolling that out in terms of policy for groundwater recharge. Other technologies is related to reuse of wastewater. We have a lot of information and good practices around the world on aquifer, managed aquifer recharge that not only replenishes the groundwater, but also prevents subsidence, land subsidence in some cities, example, Mexico City and others. Also, in Spain, in the coastal areas for Barcelona, when there are saline intrusions because of lack of groundwater or the depletion of groundwater, they have used the clean treated tertiary water for replenishment of groundwaters. There are technologies, but a lot of it is governance and planning across sectors and to plan out in times of drought, how you will use the conjunctive surface water with groundwater to manage the entire system. That's the short answer.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. And I would like to invite Livia to come in, if I can find the question again. The question is on the objective to make cities more sustainable. Do you plan to include the revision of the UWWTD in this process to have wastewater operators to be more visible in the urban planning and allow investment in runoff management?
Many thanks for the opportunity to reply to this. Indeed, the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive is very important. We're just now working on an impact assessment for its revision, and we from the adaptation team are very closely involved. The leader on this is our colleagues in the Environment Department of the Commission. Wastewaters themselves are very closely working together with communities, including in urban settings. And we definitely plan to raise their visibility, but in order to do that, also it's important to acknowledge the fact that the wastewater managers need to themselves climate-proof their infrastructure in order to deal with the variations in precipitation. So that's an important angle there to increase the resilience and to increase the capacity and to really adapt the capacity. Sometimes they need to be greatly increased. And second of all, they themselves are important actors in their communities, and they need to talk to their communities and help their communities to disconnect rainwater simply from becoming waste, and also perhaps to divert rainwater into green infrastructures instead of just dumping it in the sewage system. So that's also a joint responsibility that we are happy to help with, but that they need to take themselves. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And so we only have 2 minutes left, so I apologize if we didn't answer all questions, but I will quickly wrap this very interesting, very helpful debate up. First of all, I would like to thank all speakers today for coming, for giving your presentations, or for giving your presentations. It was really, really helpful for us. And as all our panelists are able to see the Q&A section, so if there's a question directed to you and I wasn't able to bring it up, please feel free to reply to this question bilateral. For me, it has become very clear that this is a very cross-cutting issue. Looking forward, and I am looking forward to the Commission's proposal, and I hope to see strong measures on water with clear and measurable targets and with gender aspects included. So this will also be a topic in the mentioned resolution that we vote in ENVI on November 30. And in a quick reply to Claudia Castel-Exner, your points are more or less reflected in the draft compromise amendments. Having seen and in general, having seen the compromises, I can promise that water will be well covered, and I'm very happy about it. So once again, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today, especially our panelists, but of course all participants, all colleagues, and I would like to dedicate a special thanks to Regine and Ilias, who have been wonderful help in handling this event. So thank you very much. Stay safe, take care, and hope to see you soon in person in Brussels. Bye-bye.